So today I am going to be taking the Leftvalues political test. And this time, before we get into the test, I was curious about who would make this kind of test. So there's a GitHub link right here, and it shows there's a group on GitHub called Leftvalues. Who's in this group? SparkZ9502. And what else has SparkZ made? SparkZ has made a mod of a grand strategy game called Victoria 2. And there's a bunch of alternate history properties to this mod. And I did some further research on this person and found I'm pretty certain they're an American. And they like to do recolorizations of Soviet photographs. And in the content of their mod, the Germany's revolution in 1918 was not a liberal revolution, but a communist one. So it's an alternate history mod playing out an old Marxist communist fantasy. And I think this shows a little bit about the type of person to make a quiz like this one. So anyway, let's go into this. Now, I think a lot of my problems with this quiz are actually going to be problems with the very nature of political test quizzes. I don't think that these quizzes are particularly good, particularly useful. And a big part of why I'm taking them is simply because I want to show you that there's not a lot of things that you can use to differentiate people. There are not 72 things, there are not 8 axes you can use to differentiate people compared to a few conversations with people. Just a few short conversations, you can figure out a person's politics much better. And especially, if you start from who a person is, what do they do, what is their class role, are they middle class, do they own property, what's their background, are they from the city, are they from the country, and what's their education, and this kind of thing. You can put it all together, and you can also listen what politics do they listen to, right? Most people listen to some set of political voices, and so it's not really like your personal values, your personal ideals, leftist or not, your personal values are not a reflection of your politics. Politics is not a reflection of your personal moral values or of your arbitrary personal preferences. This quiz is made from the perspective of a gamer who's setting different parameters in their video game simulation. And these are, what parameters do you think are the best parameters to set in your video game simulation? This is nothing like the actual process of dealing with political change. And this test, I don't think it's that bad of a test compared to Political Compass or the other test, 8 values. But the thing is, and I'm going to get into a lot of good conversations with the test based on the questions that they're asking today. But the thing that I really want to solidify here is that this is not politics. The result that I get on this test is not a reflection of my real political views. And you'll see that. So let's go into this, okay? So we have the different axes, right? There's revolution versus reform. Those with higher revolution tend to support a radical, rapid overthrow of the capitalist system. That is not really, revolutions can be rapid, but, that's kind of radical, rapid overthrow. That's almost an anarchist thing, right? You're not going to overthrow things that quickly. You have to build up a base of power among the workers and build up the ability to have a mass strike. You can't just call for mass strikes. You actually have to build up your power over time, right? And those with a higher reform score tend to favor inducing gradual changes, such as liberal democracy. Now, I think that this actually is kind of funny because it's saying favoring liberal democracy with the goal of reaching socialism. Well, liberal democracy, the word liberal, if you don't know, it means not socialist. It means an open market system, an open market economy. So you're saying you want liberal democracy to become not liberal somehow, which that's also wrong, right? So you need to understand that there's ways to induce gradual changes, and if possible, by running for office, inducing these changes, you can create a stronger revolutionary base, especially showing how the existing power structures respond to the changes that you're trying to make. You can actually, so you need revolution and you need reform. Scientific versus utopian. So this is kind of insane. I don't understand how this could even be an axis of opinion. Those with a higher scientific score tend to support or sympathize with the Marxist analysis of society. Well, if the Marxist analysis of society is still correct, then yes, it's scientific. But if you're taking Marx's ideas, some of which have gone out of date, like the idea that Europe will have socialist revolutions first, then, you're not taking a scientific approach. So just because something is more Marxist, you don't want to be maximally Marxist. The point of Marxism is you use Marx's analysis as a foundation for a new analysis. You be dialectical. And the rule of dialectics, of dialectical materialism, is that when conditions change, so too must your analysis change. So, you can't just be parroting Marx. You have to think about how things have changed, and don't forget the fundamental analyses of capitalism that remain true. We're still in capitalist system, so a lot of what Marx says remains true. It may have extra wrinkles added from the modern financial systems and the financialization that Marx may have predicted but never saw come into being. And with the American unipolar power block, that's new, right? But just in general, scientific analysis doesn't just mean Marxist. It means using the Marxist materialist method to create your analysis. That's what that means. And on the opposite end, it says those with a higher utopian score tend to believe in a more idealistic analysis of society and reject materialist approaches. Well, that is simply wrong. That has been proven ineffective. There has never been a utopian socialist society. This is proven wrong. It's proven ineffective. So why do you need to ask people about these things? What's the point? Central versus decentral. Okay. Those with a higher central score tend to support an economic structure based around centralized national planning. Okay. Those with a higher decentral score tend to support an economic structure based around decentralized planning. Now, this is something strange to me because this test is going to say socialism must be central or socialism must be decentral, top down, bottom up, this kind of thing. You need both. There's no such thing as a socialist system without some level of local planning, local autonomy. There's no such thing as a socialist system based entirely on localities and entirely on local planning. And when you look at, like, for example, in Catalonia, in anarchist Catalonia, they had to create a market in order to coordinate the various economic bases and firms and regions. They had to coordinate a decentralized system using markets. So by decentralizing, they made it less socialist. Same thing in Tito's Yugoslavia. Worker self-management, the way they coordinated was through a market system. So decentralization lends itself to marketization. And I've seen supposed plans like Pericon, participatory economics. These are plans, they're supposed to create a decentralized planning system using a centralized body that acts more just as an accounting body to iteratively create economic plans. But that has never been put into practice, and my suspicion is that such a body would either end up being useless or it would end up creating a central plan very similar to the old style of Soviet planning. So anyway, central versus decentral, you need both. You can't, this is not a choice. You're voluntarily making a choice. No, you need both. International versus national. Again, you need both. Those with a higher international score tend to support forming an international socialist movement, often with the eventual goal of abolishing nations. I've never heard of somebody who says we need to abolish nations completely. Have an international movement that abolishes nations. That's insane. I don't understand that at all. There's always going to be nations in this world, as far as I know, right? That we do want to strive towards the softening of borders. We don't need to have these hard national contradictions and national conflicts going on between countries. We don't need that. But abolishing nations that's an insane concept. That's not something, and we're not going to do it voluntarily. Just because you value abolishing nations and you vote in this quiz, I want to abolish nations, it's not going to happen just because you want it to happen for some reason. Those with a higher national score tend to prioritize building socialism within existing borders and reject the goal of a world socialist republic. Well, practically speaking, you have to start in one country. You have to start in one nation. When one nation creates socialism, it can't just start going around and telling every other country to become socialist. It has to lead by example. It has to become a beacon of democracy and human rights and prosperity. It has to become a beautiful system that shows the workers of the world that they too can organize and they too can create a workers' state that benefits everybody and has these beautiful things. That we can eliminate poverty and homelessness. We need to show the power of socialism. That's how you create an international socialist system. You can't just go around changing other countries' economic systems. That's not how it works. So, again, you need both. You need international, you need national. And your national socialist system within your own country. Now, I'm not talking about Nazism. They took these terms national and socialist, twisted them, they screwed them up. What I mean is socialism in a single country, and that's not based on a single nation or people. That can be based on a whole civilization. That can be based on a bunch of different nations and peoples coming together in some kind of socialist union, right? But that socialism in one country, that has to develop on its own. You can't just go it's going to ruin it if you just go to other countries and go to war with them and try to make them socialist. You're going to ruin your own domestic socialism. You're going to ruin the whole point of socialism is to end wars. We need to end wars. And, socialist countries have been the most peaceful countries, the most cooperative countries on an international level. So, but you need to start with the nation. That's just how it goes. Okay, party versus union. Okay, those with a higher party score tend to favor using political parties as the basis of a socialist movement. Those with a higher union score tend to favor using trade unions and other forms of mass organization as the basis of a socialist movement. Being pro-party does not necessarily mean you oppose unions and vice versa. It is more about preference. It is more about preference. You have a preference. Look, I think that it's important for socialists to work within unions. I think that that's a good thing for socialists to have a base among the people, and unions are a gathering of workers. Unions are a group of workers fighting in their own interests. But unions, trade unionists, throughout the history of socialism, have always been a corrupting force. They've always been a force that's fighting for immediate economic gains, more comfort for themselves. They're a strata of workers, a group of workers. Oftentimes they consider themselves superior to other workers. They want more than the other workers. And, they oftentimes are very reactionary, actually. They have not ever formed a good basis for a socialist economy. You need an ideological organ among all of the people. You need everybody to be represented. And the political party's function is to go among the people, find what people need, and deal with what people need, right? And not just the privileged union people, not just not just this union movement, which tends to, again, be, as Lenin called it, economist, meaning they want what's currently possible in the present moment gains for themselves. They don't want to have a broader change. They don't want to create social ownership or social management of the economy. They just want their little thing. So just in general, this is not about preference. This is about effective strategy. And the effective strategy is that the party has to be the core of the movement. Not that you neglect or ignore unions, but the party has to be the core of the movement. Okay, production versus nature. Those with a higher production score tend to prioritize industrial output and self-sustainability over ecological goals. Those with a higher nature score tend to support an environmentally oriented economy with strict ecological protections. Now, this is strange to me too, because what they're kind of saying is that we have to create some obligation to nature that doesn't we need to figure out what is our actual obligation to nature in order to preserve humanity as best as possible. What is our obligation to nature? What do we need to do in order to preserve humanity and keep people happy? People are happy when they have access to nature, right? People are happy when they can go somewhere and see animals in their habitat, this kind of thing, So we don't just have an obligation, we have a desire to preserve nature. As humans, we want the world to be kind of like the world where humans emerged in the first place. And that gives us a sense of comfort and belonging, unlike the cold industrial world, right? So we have the want and need to preserve nature to some extent. And, we need to determine what that actually is, to what extent that actually is. simply prioritizing production, raw productivism, it's very lazy approach. You're not thinking in the long term about your real obligations. But at the same time, saying we just need to, just let nature be, just go back to how things were before, we can't. We can't. There is, whether or not humans have set it into motion, we know for a fact that there has been a complete pivot in carbon. And we know that the global temperature is rising at a very high rate right now. We need to be ready to face those changes. And going back, reducing the amount of production, reducing technology, reducing standards of living, that is going to happen as a consequence of those changes. We need to fight against it. We need to keep on building forwards. We can't just lay back and take it when these changes occur. And so production is necessary in order to overcome the natural changes. This is not a true choice. It's not a true dichotomy. And finally, we have conservative versus progressive. And, this test, I'm fairly certain, was made by an American, which would explain why there's a conservative, progressive axis. And I just think in general, conservative progressive issues shouldn't be reinforced on a political basis. We shouldn't be reinforcing the idea that you have to fight either in a reactionary sense against trans rights, gay rights, against abortion. You have to fight in a reactionary sense, or you have to fight in a progressive sense, push forward on all fronts, have maybe neo-pronouns and have, all these other things. This is not a good fight to have. This is not a good political division to have. This is the political division that the ruling class wants us to have. They want us to be fighting over these social issues while our economic life, our economic base is being destroyed. That's what they want. So I don't want to reinforce this. Personally, I tend to be a pretty progressive person, but I don't want to reinforce this division. And I don't like it when this is on these kind of tests. So finally, it's going to try to give me a closest match ideology based on my responses. And, it's probably going to be wrong because this is not a good way to do that. But anyway, and, that this author is open to criticism. Well, here's my criticism. I'm making my criticism. It might be a little bit too damning. It might be a little bit too much. I don't know. I think, maybe just for fun, this test is okay. Maybe if you don't take it too seriously, if you just want to look at some political questions for leftists that people tend to think about, tend to argue about, then you'll get some, and maybe it'll show your differences in thinking between you and people to some extent, as on a fun, personal level. That's okay. But if you're taking this test seriously, if you think that this is determining your real political alignment, and you think that these 7 axes are going to determine how you need to act in a political way, then you're not really understanding the meaning of tests. You're not understanding the relationship between politics and values. Because yes, personal values shape politics to a good extent, but your politics is not simply your values as an individual. It's not a set of sliders in a video game for you to customize. All right, let's begin the quiz. Here we go. All right. So, question 1. The means of production, such as factories and farms, must be publicly owned. Okay, so right off the bat, here is a definition of Marxism. Okay, this is a definition. And by publicly owned, what does this mean? What does this mean? In a fully socially managed economy without a private sector, there is collective ownership of means of production. And that means that the state organizes production in a way that's accountable to the people. And there's, bodies, the Soviets, for example, but there's bodies of workers that represent workers' interests to the state. And, so it's the people control production through the state, which acts as a greater power than the capitalist market system, right? And, that is a form of public ownership of means of production. So, I agree with that. But, this could mean a lot of things. All right. The global socialist movement should be led by a single party or organization. It really has never been. There have been party groups like the IWA and the Communist International have worked to bring together many different parties and organizations, but it's good when every country has its own communist party. So, I don't think it needs to be. Okay? I don't think that's even possible to lead every nation with a single body. A highly centralized planned economy is not socialism, but rather state capitalism. So this question is saying what exactly? Because like I outlined in the introduction, when you have decentralization, that tends to create markets. That tends to create competition. That tends to create a system that's much more capitalistic. But the idea is that after a long development of a more centralized socialist system, then things decentralize and they become more socially, automatically managed or something like that. And, that's kind of the idea, but that's something that comes in the long term. Right now, we need to have centralized system. And socialism. What does socialism mean? I think that this whole test is a lot of it is arguing about what is the definition of socialism and saying we need to create a socialist system, but what does that mean? Well, socialism has a very simple meaning. Socialism literally just means that the economy and the state is managed towards people's needs rather than towards the needs of the select people. In capitalism, it's about the select people. It's about the property owners. It's about select people. In socialism, it's about all the people. So socialism is about democratization of the economy, okay? And democratization of the economy doesn't just mean that everybody has ownership of their own little factory, their own machines, direct ownership in a decentralized, localized way. That is not necessary. It's more effective when you have at least some overarching centralized plan, and that doesn't turn things into state capitalism. Capitalism is more decentralized than socialism. In America, we have an oligarchy that controls the state. We have a bunch of monopolies bouncing around doing their own thing. We can't vote for the leaders of these monopolies. They're just doing their own thing, and the state does what they want. It supports them. It gives the police to support them, and it creates government programs to support them. Obamacare was the merging of the private sector with public control of healthcare. It was a complete merging between the oligarchy and the state, but it came from the oligarchy. It came from the separate, decentralized thing. And a lot of the problems that we have in capitalism are because of a lack of broader coordination. It's because of the atomization of production and the inability of the market to distribute resources correctly. So, no, this is completely wrong-headed. It's completely wrong. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs is a good principle. Now, I've heard this before. This appears on the political compass. This appeared on 8 Values. Now it's appearing here as well. And just in general, this is the slogan of socialism. When you don't have enough labor occurring on a voluntary basis to support the economy, you need to ask from people based on their ability to work. You can't just tell people, work if you want to, don't work if you don't want to. If we haven't built up the productive forces to the point where that's possible, then we need to actually get people to go to work somehow. And we have to build an incentive system that gets people to work based on their ability. So is it a good principle? Well, this part of it, this is a necessary principle. At least the way things are now. At least the way things are now, we're going to have to incentivize people to work. To each according to his needs. Now, what would be the converse of this? Don't provide for people's needs. That wouldn't be socialism. And that wouldn't be good either. It wouldn't be good. When people's needs aren't met, that isn't good. We have the resources to, at the very least, meet people's needs. Even in very impoverished countries, which a lot of their impoverishment is the result of sanctions, economic blockades, this kind of thing. But like in DPRK in Cuba, they may not have the most resources to go around, but everybody's getting their needs met, at least when the resources exist to meet everybody's needs, which is most of the time. These days, that's most of the time people's needs get met. So I would agree it's good, at least for now, it's good. You know, you need some level of ability-based labor incentive, okay? Foreign officials have no right to dictate policy in another country. I mean, yes and no. If you understand how international politics actually works, you know that countries have to make agreements and compromises. If two countries are at war, they are going to have to dictate each other's policy to come up with a compromise. So, you know, maybe you don't have no right to do it. You can't do it freely, like America's doing with the world, setting the world's policy. The IMF will tell you what economic policy to set. You know, that they have no right to do that. They have the might to do it. They have the power to do it. They leave countries with no other choice. But they have no right to do it. There's no right to do it. So I would agree. Okay. Mass spontaneous actions are more effective than carefully planned actions. What do you mean? What do you mean? Because here's the thing. The most effective actions that you can take may be based on an organization or body that has planning and has a central, organ that plans and says what to do. The party may do that, but the party only has a certain amount of membership. The people is the people. That's the people. The party has its membership. It's guiding the people. It's leading the people, but the people are the people. They do what they do, and they may do it in a somewhat spontaneous way. When there's a general strike, it's neither carefully planned nor spontaneous. It's neither. It's both. So you're comparing these two things, but you're not. What's the point? What's the point? And voluntarily, I'm taking this quiz. If I think mass spontaneous actions are more effective, how am I going to affect that actual change in reality? Or how am I going to affect carefully planned actions in reality when there is not a communist party guiding the people that's carefully planning these things? There is not one. So who's going to carefully plan it? Anyway, I'm not sure. A world socialist republic is a realistic and desirable goal. Right now, that is so far off the horizon that I can't even picture what a world socialist republic would look like. And also, not just republic, but it needs to be democratic. It needs to be accountable to all 7 billion, or maybe by the time this is made, 20 billion people, however many billions of people. It has to be accountable to all of these people, all of the global needs. It needs to be accountable to everybody. We do not have anything like that, remotely like that, set up. And everybody's idea of socialism is based on their own cultural and, just general needs as a people, wants and needs as a people. So how can you account for all of that? That's not something we're thinking about right now. We're not thinking about a world socialist republic right now. This is that strategy game. This person that made this test plays all these strategy games. They think that we can think in these terms. That's not how it works. Humanity must return to the primitive ways of the past to overcome long-term climate issues. We can't. The change is set in motion. We can't go back. If we do that, we're going to have mass death. It's going to kill most of the people on this earth to try to go back to that. You want to kill most of the people on this earth? I don't think so. The negative consequences of a revolution generally outweigh the advantages of a revolution. I think that the American Revolution of Independence was good, and I think the American Civil War, which was arguably a revolution, that was very good. It's good that we abolished slavery. That was a really good thing. Are you saying we shouldn't have done that? Is that what you're saying? Because I would disagree. We must accept that the socialist states of the 20th century failed to seriously address environmental issues. This is true. And they got lazy. Stalin had massive environmental plans. Khrushchev dropped them. He abandoned them. They got lazy because it's hard to govern in such a way where you account for the long-term environmental issues. And, they didn't have as much science now. We have more environmental science, and we also have more acute environmental problems, right? So, yeah, we need to take that seriously. And the socialist states of the 21st century are taking that seriously. Total economic and social equality is realistically possible to achieve. Now, they use this word equality, right? Equality. Now, that's good. Because equality is about a fair system. It's where everybody has a fair chance to succeed. Now, we still can't have perfect equality. People are born with different levels of ability in different areas. People are born in different regions. They have access to different opportunities. So we can never have total economic and social equality. But, we should strive towards it. And equity is not achievable. Equity is the outcomes. Equality is the system. Equity is the outcome. We cannot have total equity no matter what we do. And equality, we should strive towards it. Is it realistically possible? Totally no. But yes, we should strive towards it. So I will agree with that. Climate change is a major global threat that all socialists must fiercely combat. Climate change. Well, we're going to have to affect, if we can affect the climate itself, that would be a wonderful thing. I mean, you'd be careful playing God, but if we can actually reverse it, that would be incredible. Keep the earth at a more stable period for human development. That would be incredible. And, I think that as socialists, we care about the people of the earth. And in this way, we care about the earth itself, so I agree with this. An underdeveloped society as a centrally planned economy is the best way to make rapid progress. Well, right now, in the face of global imperialism, countries really have two choices. They can either bend to the will of America, they can take IMF loans, right? And then they can try to become rich in this way. And they probably won't. It probably takes a really long time. You know, it might not work the best. Or they can nationalize. They can be like North Korea. They can be heavily nationalized, isolated, centrally planned, and try to build up their economy in isolation, because America will isolate you. If you're nationalist, they'll isolate you. They'll try to destroy you. They'll try to overthrow your leadership. So we're not in a system right now where underdeveloped societies have a good choice to make here. Neither of these choices are very good. China is making deals with a lot of these countries. And when you make deals with China, you're opening up your economy. And sure, maybe this is still part of a central plan, but you're opening up your economy in a way that's more positive. They're developing infrastructure in people's countries. They're building, roads and ship ports and, this kind of thing. That's good in the long run. That's going to be good in the long run. But if you want to make rapid progress through a central plan, you have to be big. You have to be Russia or China. Both did that. You have to be big to really succeed with that, because otherwise America will exclude you from the global system, and that could change. But that's how it is. That's how it goes. The state can be best defined as a monopoly on violence and oppression. This is one definition of the state. Words have multiple definitions and meanings that we use in context. So the state can be defined as a monopoly on violence and oppression. The state can be defined as the rule of one class over another class. The state can be defined a few different ways. There's not necessarily a best definition. The government should be capable of assigning individuals to workplaces. No, that's a stereotype. This is a stereotype about socialism that Mr. Stalin was telling people, you go be a teacher. You put on the magic sorting hat. It tells you you're Gryffindor, you're Slytherin. No, that's not how it works. That's not how socialism works. People choose their path. People choose what education they want to get. People choose their career path. People choose. People have chosen what they do. It's not a guild system. It's not a magic sorting hat. No, people choose. The leadership of political parties in the progression towards socialism will always lead to authoritarianism. I mean, it can. It can. And here's the thing. The political parties, the role of the party and the state, this is a relationship you have to examine, because if the party is integrated really tightly with the state, it's easy for the party and the state to become more corrupt and more authoritarian. But when they remain separate and you allow independent people to work within the state, or third parties, second parties, to work within the state, that can cause less corruption, because all of a sudden the Communist Party has to actually appeal to people's real interests. It has to actually, solidify its power in a democratic way. That's how it's supposed to be. And if the Communist Party is failing to win in a democratic way, then it has to change, and it has to become less corrupt. So, in a way, authoritarianism, you need some level of authoritarianism in the state itself. But the party is not an authoritarian institution. It shouldn't be an authoritarian institution. So I'm going to disagree. The international proletariat belongs to no country. It's true. It's true, because this is the international proletariat. There's national proletariat, and there's the international proletariat, which is all of the national proletariats summed together. That's the definition of the international proletariat. Measures to address environmental issues are unacceptable if they result in significant decreases in production and quality of life. Look, we're going to have to deal with environmental issues which themselves are a threat to our production and quality of life. The environmental issues themselves, not simply the measures to combat them, these issues themselves are a threat to production and quality of life. Why do we put in measures that are going to do this? What you're really doing is you're saying, we're making short-term sacrifices for the long-term gain. By dealing with environmental issues now, by maybe reducing production or something like that, you're thinking in the long run, we're going to overcome the environmental issues. So this isn't about production versus environment. This question is about short-term versus long-term. Do we make short-term sacrifices for the environment in the long term? And maybe we have to. But we don't know. We simply don't know. Modern social democracy is a betrayal of left-wing values. Now, the term social democracy nowadays means reformism. That's what that means. And the left wing was revolutionary in its inception. But like values, it's all about values. Why does it matter what your values are? It doesn't matter what your values are. You want to achieve peace. You want to achieve a better life for your own people. You're not just being left-wing just to be revolutionary. You actually want things to be better. And reformism has shown, in America, we had FDR, right? But reformism has shown itself not to be a particularly effective way of achieving what it is the left wing wants to achieve, which is peace and good for the people. So, I would agree, but, it's not about just being a leftist. It's not about just having left-wing values. The oppression of LGBTQ people is a major issue that needs to be seriously addressed. How many people are LGBTQ? There's a decent amount of people. This makes it sound really, really grave. And for some people, it is really bad. They're rejected by their families. They can be subject to violence. It is a serious issue. Socialist organizations are generally better off when organized loosely and decentrally. No. There is no... I cannot think of an example of a successful socialist organization that is loose and decentral. I cannot think of one. Ideally, this is what happens in these orgs. They start out, they're kind of loose, they're kind of decentral. People kind of get to have different opinions and argue. That's good. We should have different opinions. We should have different ideas on strategy. We should argue. We should figure out what's correct, right? But when it comes down to it, when there's threats from the outside, those threats are going to come and they're going to fracture these organizations on these lines. They're going to try to get fractions of people to break off of the org. And so you need to have that central uniting defensiveness. And when it comes down to it, When it's wartime, when things are really serious and you're under attack, you have to be as tight and central as you can be. But it's good when you can have decentralization and autonomy and difference of opinion and strategy, try different things. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Capitalism will induce its own demise through contradictions that result in crisis. Look, we have capitalist crises that give an opportunity for socialism to come about, but these crises themselves do not inherently result in the demise of capitalism. It still comes back. We had the Great Depression. Capitalism still came back. So it doesn't simply come to its own demise. And this question is probably, if I agree, it's probably saying I'm a more scientific socialist. But the question is not accurate. People of similar cultures should unite in federations or confederations. Similar cultures? What? They can. Why should they? Why is the should? What's it going to achieve? It could be good. You find like-minded people, it can be good. Find your cultural people, but why is it important? Why is that important for socialism? Any socialist country should be dedicated to exporting their ideology abroad. I mean, if you mean by force, then no. But if it's just the ideology, then yes. Yes. Traditional gender roles, such as women being homemakers, need to be overcome. I mean, I'm in the city. I'm in a very progressive area. We don't believe that women need to stay in the home. We don't believe that here. National liberation or self-determination for all peoples is a good concept. I mean, I agree. I agree with that. A lot of times national chauvinism is labeled as national liberation, and these ultranationalists who hate other people are trying to carve out their own state through violence, and they act as a disruptive or terroristic force. That's no good. But national liberation is good. Everybody should have the right to determine their own destiny, their own future. Minority populations should receive special legal protections. I mean, if they're under attack, yes. Society is chiefly driven by individuals and ideas. Chiefly. No. Chiefly no. We tend to focus on individuals, like we will say Joe Biden when we're actually referring to Joe Biden's whole cabinet and his, all of the Democratic Party, really, and maybe even the whole political establishment. You still might call it Joe Biden, but that doesn't mean that you think that Joe Biden's driving the whole thing. And ideas, I mean, where do ideas come from? Ideas come from the real conditions. It's like you're a 7-year-old child. You don't know what the heck is going on in society. And you say, should we plan resources in a central or decentral way? No, we know what's going on in society. We see how this decentralization and chaos causes a lot of problems. And that's why that idea of centralization is good and correct. So, I don't know. I would say not chiefly, no, not chiefly. Marriage is a patriarchal social construct that should be phased out. I have not really thought about this question. I'm not married. I don't think that ending marriage is going to bring about socialism. Bureaucracy and inefficiency are always inherent in centrally planned economies. This is true. And Bureaucracy and inefficiency are an inherent part of every single economy that there is, and you need to constantly fight against it. You need to have accountability. You need to fight against it, but it is an inherent part of every single economic system. You cannot achieve a socialist society without also making significant social progress. We do need to rally behind all people who are victims of oppression. And, we need to try to make things better for everybody. But is that a prerequisite for socialism? I'm not really sure. I don't know if that's a prerequisite. Redistributing wealth away from the wealthy through taxes is a viable way of defeating inequality. No, it's not, because the property owners still have control over the economy. The people who don't own property, who are living off of welfare or redistributed resources, they don't have access to the same opportunity as the people who have capital, who have property. So redistributing wealth away from the wealthy through taxes, that doesn't defeat inequality. Nationalism and patriotism are impulses that are unacceptable in a socialist society. Look, we have in America, what does nationalism and patriotism mean? It's based on this kind of nostalgia almost, and it's based on this bourgeois nationalism, where nationalism means that we need to go bomb Syria, we need to go defend America's national interests in the world. That's what nationalism tends to mean in America. We socialists, we want to redefine nationalism to mean that you actually care about the people of your own country. And we don't want it to mean that white nationalism. We don't want it to mean that we ignore the existing national contradictions in our society. We don't want nationalism to mean creating a single coherent nation when there are multiple nations living in America. That's not what we want nationalism to mean. So, nationalism and patriotism, they have their problems, but we socialists need to reclaim these terms, because by actually caring about the American people and by advocating a viable long-term strategy, by advocating against war and imperialism, which is currently failing our country, as we fall deeper into it, as our military budget explodes, as we fall deeper into this failing imperialist system where more and more money goes to weapons rather than going to national development. And, the word nationalism here has a lot of ambiguity in a country that has these national contradictions, where the smaller nations in America are highly oppressed. How can you be a nationalist when we're not even a coherent nation, right? So in a way, being nationalist is very idealistic, because you want to create a unified American nation out of all of the peoples within America. So, maybe we shouldn't use the word nationalist to refer to ourselves, but we do have to show that we really do care. And we have to be careful about saying we don't care about American people. That's not good. Socialists have to care about our fellow people. That's what socialism means. It means the system is built for the people. Socialist political parties should participate in liberal democratic elections. It really all depends. Because if there's a very high level of corruption in your political system, you may be unable to participate in those elections. You should still probably try to get your voice heard and get it out there during a time when people are highly receptive to politics. But, that it may not be the most effective strategy at all times. You may want to put your energy somewhere else. It will be important to implement extensive environmental protections as part of achieving socialism. I don't understand this very well. So what this is kind of saying, to me, this is saying that socialism needs to be based on a permaculture. So it's saying that in order to have socialism, we need our economic system to last forever. We need it to be like a system that can be preserved forever without ever having to change or without being subject to environmental degradation. But we don't have the ability, right now, we don't have the ability to create that sort of permanence. Technology is constantly innovating and changing. Things are constantly changing. We can't create an infinite, permanent socialist system. And when we get to the point where we've achieved socialism, what does that mean? That just means that we've achieved a system that's accountable to the people. It doesn't mean that we've reached some nirvana, some eternal utopia that's never going to run into its own environmental problems. That's not what socialism means. A centrally planned economy based around computers is a concept worth investigating. So this is like Paul Cockshot, this is like cyber Stalinism, right? I'm not sure. I'm not really sure, because we've shown that having a private sector in socialism, having a private sector that's controlled by the state, where the billionaires have to do what the state says, is also a really good way of maintaining dynamism and innovation in an economy. I think the fact that you're planning using computers isn't necessarily going to bring about that sort of dynamism that you need. So I'm not really sure, I'm not sure. I think it's worth investigating. It is. Material conditions and needs are the dominant drive behind socioeconomic changes. Material conditions and needs are the economy. That is the economy. So you're saying the economy is the dominant drive behind what exactly? Socioeconomic changes. Socioeconomic means that it's at the intersection between social change and economic change. It means that society is changing, the economy is changing, they're changing each other. That's what that means. So it's saying material conditions and needs, you're saying the economy is what's behind socioeconomics. That's only true of half of socioeconomics. That's not what socioeconomics is. I think that this question is trying to say one of the theses of Marxism is that material conditions and needs are the dominant drive between social and political change. And that's true. But socioeconomics is not the same thing as social and political change. It's not the same thing. The principles of workplace democracy and self-management are desirable. We saw what happened in Yugoslavia. It didn't last. Maybe in the future, in the long future, it is desirable, but it didn't last. Experimental, environmentally friendly food sources like cultured meat are worth investing in. Look, meat production, I don't know what share in environmental impact meat production has, but in America, I think it's very significant. We have a lot of grazing lands. We have a lot of meat production. And it's good that we can all eat meat, this energy dense and, highly delicious, nutritious source of food. It's good that we can have it. If we can no longer produce meat because we lose land from climate change or something like that, then we maybe would want to invest in something like this. It could be good. I don't know. Is it worth investing in? I don't know if it's worth investing in, because investment implies it's going to grow and make money at some point in the future, at some point during your lifetime, when you'll be able to use the money you've invested. And I don't know if that's true. I'm not sure. But, it's worth looking at potential solutions if that's something that's needed. Abortion is an immoral act that should be banned or significantly limited. No, it's not. To me, it's not immoral. I'm agnostic, but to me, it's not immoral. That's not the main thing about abortion. An economy is generally designed better when it is organized bottom up rather than top down. A socialist economy is organized both bottom up and top down. It's a cycle. It's a cycle. The top down control of the economy is real and necessary in order to keep the economy from exploding into a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, where the people in the economy start to, take advantage of private ownership to accumulate capital and accumulate power and corrupt the economy and create a capitalist system. And you need that top-down control to keep that from happening. But you also can't simply operate based on this top-down control. First of all, it wouldn't be stable if you don't actually meet people's needs. If you have a bureaucrat class that is running the economy and not actually accountable to people's needs, people aren't going to be happy. They're going to rise up and they're going to want a new system. They're going to demand a new system. They won't be happy. You need bottom-up organization. You need a mass line and the ability for people to tell the system at the top what to do in managing the economy. So it's a cycle. It's a cycle, and it's top down and it's bottom up. It's not a dichotomy. You don't want simply top down organization, and it's not possible to organize simply from the bottom up. It's not possible. The fact that so many workers vote for bourgeois parties over socialist parties is proof that party politics are no longer relevant. Why is this in here? This is a very loose and shoddy justification for the opposition to party politics. Parties are, so far at least, parties are the main way that socialism comes about. You have to have a party, and maybe there's another way, maybe there's some other thing, but I think that this is very weak justification. Religions overall have a mostly positive effect and should remain influential in society. In America, we have a lot of Christians. We have different religions, though. We have freedom of religion. And, I don't think we need to tear down the churches and be militant atheists destroying religion. But I don't think we also need to have a theocracy, or anything like that. I think we need freedom of religion. Human population growth must be curbed to prevent an ecological disaster. Jeez. I mean, I don't know. I think there's a better way. Because who's going to decide who lives or dies? Who's going to decide that? That's not good. That's not good. And if we're short on resources, if the world is falling apart, we're short on resources, people won't have as many children. People won't have as much children. It controls itself. Must be curbed. It implies somebody has to curb it. It implies that there's a eugenic agency that's deciding who's worth keeping and who you need to kill. That's not good. It is acceptable for humanity to suffer to some notable extent in order to preserve the natural ecosystem. Again, this is that short-term versus long-term thing. We don't know what's going to happen in the long term. And if we know what's going to happen and we have to make sacrifices for future generations, we should, but is that really needed? We must radically alter our food consumption in order to limit the exploitation of nature. Again, I don't know that I don't know. I'm not an environmental scientist. I don't know. Democratic centralism is an authoritarian organizational structure that disregards the masses. You know, the earlier question said that the party form naturally leads to authoritarianism. Democratic centralism is the form of the party. And if it disregards the masses, that's its own failing. It's not going to come into power. It's not going to be successful. So democratic centralism, it is authoritarian to an extent, because when the majority makes a decision, the rest are obliged to go along with it. It's something you do when you're under attack from external threats. You have to centralize your action in order to avoid being split by external threats, in order to unify in times of emergency. The party itself is democratic central, but the state is not democratic centralist. The state is organized in its own way. It's separate from the party. And democratic centralism can become authoritarian, and it can start to disregard the masses. But if that's true, it simply will not succeed. But the notion of it being inherently flawed is wrong, because it's the only way to thrive. It's the only way to avoid being broken up by these attacks. Liberal democracy is a viable way of achieving a socialist society. Liberal democracy means you have an open, free market society that is not socialist. So how are you going to achieve socialism by having liberal democracy? It's never happened before. It's never going to happen. You need to X out the liberal, and, you know, it's good to have democracy and socialism. Socialism is the democratization of the economy, but you're not going to get it through liberal democracy reforms. It's never happened. It never will. Maybe some very radical reforms, it may be possible, but I haven't seen it. I haven't yet seen it. It is foolish to expect renewable energy sources to be able to replace fossil fuels. What about nuclear? Nuclear can replace a lot of fossil fuels. I don't think solar and wind can replace very much fossil fuels, but I think nuclear power can. It can. Workplace democracy within capitalism is an acceptable alternative to a complete socialization of the economy. An acceptable alternative, not if it doesn't work, not if it falls apart, not if it results in balkanization like it did in Yugoslavia. Then it's not acceptable, because then it just goes back to what we had before. And workplace democracy within capitalism. When has the cooperative movement shown its ability to address the question of the state? When have cooperatives actually addressed these things? I have cooperatives near me, and one of them barely pays its workers anything. It barely pays its workers a livable wage. So workplace democracy, it doesn't solve the problem. It's not a viable alternative at all. A socialist government has no right to disrupt religious or cultural traditions in any situation. That's wrong. That's wrong. Religious and cultural traditions are one thing, but extremism is a problem. Extremism can be a massive problem. It can require disruption. So there are cases where you need to deal with it. Some small-scale destruction of nature is acceptable if it notably benefits humanity. We are destroying nature on a very large scale, and it has notably benefited humanity. If you disagree with this, then I don't know what to say. You're living on a planet with billions of people. If we don't continue to destroy nature to some extent, we're not going to be able to sustain our population. You're advocating for mass death. So we have to deal with what we have. Prisons are oppressive and antiquated institutions that need to be abolished. We can't abolish prisons. There's people that belong in prison. What are you going to do? Kill them? There's people that belong in prison. I'm sorry. There's some people, they don't belong in society. They need to be locked up. In an old society, they'd be exiled. You say you can't come to the village anymore or we'll kill you. That's in the old society. They had exiles. Or they did kill people. Now we have prisons. It's more civilized. Some people are not fit to be in society. I would be willing to sacrifice economic resources in my home country to help other countries. Now, some people would disagree. Some people say America first, right? And I think a lot of times they don't realize that we're really playing the long game here. We're playing 1,000-year games here. I mean, maybe you want your life to be better now, but in the long run, what benefits humanity as a whole is going to raise up everybody. We're playing the long game. We need to think in thousands of years. And so I agree to this because I think that, we need to raise everybody up. Policies that enable mass immigration are naive and should not be implemented. Look, the world develops in an unequal way, and the countries that are less rich are going to have people that want to go to the richer countries naturally. And capitalism makes this way, 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 way worse. Imperialism, colonialism makes this 100 times worse than it would be otherwise. Right now, if we allow for mass immigration, we're going to have we're going to have problems. Unfortunately, it would cause problems. But if we stop being imperialist, mass immigration won't really be that much of a problem. We won't want to have, I don't want to have hard controls on our border, right? And in the future, we can probably soften up borders and allow for mass immigration to occur to some extent, especially in the global reality of climate change. People are going to have to immigrate. Revolutionary violence is acceptable as long as the final outcome is positive. I mean, that's how it was. The American War for Independence, the Civil War. That violence was acceptable. It was acceptable. Industrialized farming practices must be abolished even if it leads to lower outputs. Absolutely not. Again, this mass death policy, you can care about the earth without advocating for mass death policies. Personal motor vehicles such as cars should be replaced with free public transport. In America, we have a lot of cars that we don't need to have. We can have better transport. We shouldn't replace things completely. We cannot replace things completely. Cars are nice. It's nice to have a car. But we should replace them to some extent. We should have better public transport. The establishment of socialism is a gradual process rather than an instant or rapid one. It happens in phases. And sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's fast. It changes dynamically. It is not a gradual or a rapid process. It is a process of contradictions sorting themselves out. And the establishment of socialism is not complete instantly. After you have a socialist government, what you really have is a socialist-oriented government. It's going to develop the forces of production. It's going to reinforce equality, and it's going to progress in a socialist direction. And in that way, the establishment of such a government may be rapid, but that rapid change may happen after a long and gradual growth and building of power. It's not going to happen through a random insurrection. So it's not gradual or instant. Trade unions and workers' councils should form the basis of a socialist society. Yes, you need to have counsel among the people. You need to have counsel among the people, and workers' unions are a good way to do it. This doesn't mean that I think we need to have what De Leon advocated for, which would be replacing the House and Senate with trade union leaders. I don't think that would work, but I do think that the state should be accountable to the people. Unions should represent workers, represent people's needs to the state. And that's a good thing. Socialism can only be fully achieved in developed industrialized societies. Fully achieved. Socialism will never be fully achieved. At least probably not in my lifetime. It won't be fully achieved. If it is fully achieved, it will be in a developed industrialized society. But I mean, it won't be. It is necessary to establish a dictatorship of the proletariat as a transitory stage between capitalism and socialism. What is this saying? This is saying that the dictatorship of the proletariat is not socialism. So despite the fact that you have a socially managed economy, despite the fact that you are running the country in a socialist direction, that's not socialism. Why is that? Why is that not socialism? Open borders between like-minded socialist countries is desirable. I mean, probably true. In the long run, true. But I don't understand why this emphasis on border policy. What does that have to do with socialism? Why do we have to agree on a border policy before we can fight together? Why? Reforming capitalist society to achieve better rights for workers is desirable. It is desirable. And it establishes the legitimacy of communism. It establishes that the Communist Party cares about the people. If it comes into power and does things that are good for the people, that's good. Trade unionism has been largely corrupted by the ruling class and is no longer a viable structure for a socialist organization. It never was. I mean, in the early days of socialism, or in the early days of the development of capitalism, you had the Chartists who were radical unionists. And, you had very early on, you had radical unionists, and but that naturally sorted itself out into more economist type unionism, and that's how it's been. And that wasn't just corruption by the ruling class. That is the nature of trade unionism. It's built into trade unionism to become more economist, become more favoring of gradual change and allowing in right-wing opportunism, supporting wars, and, this kind of thing. It is possible to peacefully convince the ruling class to conform to a socialist society. Not at all. That has never been proven true. That is what Robert Owen, Charles Fourier tried to do, and it was proven impossible. A socialist revolution is made inevitable by the conditions of capitalism. That is true. That is true. Only a mass workers' party can achieve any meaningful long-term goals. I mean, any meaningful long-term goals. This is weird, right? Because people that aren't in a mass workers' party can still work towards meaningful long-term goals. But the party is the essential thing. It's really important. At least the way things are now, the party form is very important. Class conflict is a force that has influenced much of human history. Of course, it has. That's one of the main things that Marx will be correct about. You know, Marx and Engels have revealed to us, and, you know, class analysis is old. Aristotle did class analysis, right? And, you know, Marx and Engels did class analysis in a new way. They created the historical materialist system. It's one of their greatest contributions to human thought. And it's true. Revolution is the best way of achieving a socialist society. I mean, it's the only way of achieving a socialist society. It's not the best way, it's the only way. Oppressed peoples have the right to engage in a violent uprising when all other options have been exhausted. I mean, all other options includes what exactly? You don't just have a violent uprising, you say, oh, we tried this, we tried that, it didn't work, you know, we tried running for office, it didn't work, we tried making co-ops, it didn't work, we tried making unions, it didn't work, and now I guess we just have to kill everyone in the government. That's not how it works. The socialist movement takes all of these things and tries to unify them under party leadership, and what tends to happen is that the party leadership and the people are cracked down on violently by the state. They have to defend themselves. And they have to defend the socialist society that they're trying to create. They have to defend it. They don't want to kill people violently. They don't want to. But that's what tends to emerge in this type of situation. Local planners, rather than national planners, are more efficient at running a planned economy. No, that's not true. That is simply not true. From a scientific perspective, it's impossible to plan an economy better through local individual plans than through a grand unifying plan. Scientifically speaking, it's worse to have local planners. All right, here's my results. Okay. Highly revolutionary, highly scientific, not favoring central or decentral, because I see that as a false contradiction. Internationalist, okay. Partisan, okay. Production versus nature, again, not very strong there. And progressive, right? Because I'm in the city, I'm socially progressive. I think we need to rally behind all oppressed people if we can. If we can. Closest match, orthodox Marxism. Are you kidding me? Orthodox Marxism is literally, that's what Karl Kautsky, the social imperialist, Karl Kautsky, he advocated for inter-imperialist warfare and called it defensive. Karl Kautsky, the centrist pushover who allowed right opportunism to thrive in the Second International, Karl Kautsky is the one who called himself an orthodox Marxist. Do they know what this term means? What are they talking about? Orthodox Marxism is a form of Marxism that adopts views that conform to Marx's theory as it was originally written. Orthodox Marxists are highly revolutionary and internationalist and hold that non-industrial societies are incapable of achieving socialism. That's not what Orthodox Marxism means. That's just what Marxism means. That's literally just what Marxism means. That's not Orthodox Marxism. Orthodox Marxism is Karl Kautsky. Council communism. What? Okay, central Marxism. Okay, centrist Marxism. Okay. refraining from taking a definitive position on revolution and reformism. I don't know where they got these ideological labels from. These labels don't make any sense to me. This label is completely wrong. They clearly don't know what these labels mean. I hope people are not labeling themselves based on these things. Look, I can fill out a short form. You think I should go and give them a link to my video? Do you think I should go here and tell them? No, right? No. Orthodox Marxism. What aspects should be improved or changed, or why? Orthodox Marxism is Karl Kautsky's ideology. It is not what I believe. Learn some history. You know, should I link them to this video? What do you think? Give them a link to my video? I think they probably won't watch it all. It's going to be over an hour long, but anyway, that's my results. I'm not a fan of these results. I don't think this quiz is particularly good. But yeah, I've said my piece. I've said what I think about it. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, share, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.